I want to give my testimony of what happened to me, how I received the Holy Spirit. I went through 15 years of mood disorder, bipolar disorder, type 1 and 2, severe depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I was diagnosed by 7 different psychiatrists at the VA. They gave me over 11 different medications. Nothing worked, nothing. December 26th of 2023, I woke up that morning. It was worse than it had ever been. You could have wrote me a check for $1 trillion, gave me all the most beautiful women in the world. It wouldn't have did nothing for me. I was crying. I rolled on my knees and I said, Lord, if you really are God, why are you hurting me like this? I said, if you take this from me, I promise I'll do a little exercise and I'll read and study your word every day for the rest of my life. And I got off my knees. I started on January 1st. At that time, I was reading the NIV. I now use the New King James because it comes from the Hebrew Masoretic text and the Greek text is Receptus. But starting on page 1 of Genesis and page 1 of Matthew, and I read them simultaneously. And I was reading about 3.5 hours every day. The first thing that happened, my sister said, Rex, there's something different about you. I said, well, what is it? This was the first week of March, I'm sorry. And I said, well, what is it? She said, you just sound better. I never had told her about my depression or anybody but my psychiatrist. I look back, God had walked me out of the depression so gradual, I didn't even know I was healed. I didn't even know if it happened that week, if it happened in the 1st January, or even when I got off my knees on December 26th of 2023. I was reading about a week and a few days later. It was the 13th or the 15th of March, and a spiritual truth came together. It was the first time I ever came to truly believe that what I was reading was true. And I sat back in the chair. I remember smiling. I was like, wow, and I sat back in that chair. And by the time my back hit the back of that chair, I felt the energy on the bottom of my sternum. It was back and up about an inch, and it was pulsating every 5 to 8 seconds in my chest. I jumped up out that chair. I started crying profusely, and I couldn't sit still. I was going back and forth, inside, outside. And for 3.5 hours, it was 8:45. I called my sister. I said, Dean, I can't stop crying. I don't know what's going on. She said, well, what happened? I just explained to her I was reading. She said, Rex, you experienced the Holy Spirit for the first time. I said, you got to be kidding me. I read the Quran. It had no spiritual awakening, no spiritual enlightenments. I studied with the Jehovah's Witnesses. I did the rituals of the Catholic Church, Mormons, Buddhism, Hinduism, nothing. If you want to see that Holy Spirit, get the New King James, start on page 1 of Genesis and Matthew and read them simultaneously. And when you finish the New Testament, just start it over, keep reading, and you will receive that Holy Spirit, and I promise.